Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this press conference by the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, in the framework of the Global Refugee Forum that is going on here at Palexpo in Geneva until Friday. So we'll give the floor to the High Commissioner first, and then we will open the floor to questions. High Commissioner.
Thank you, Alessandra. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming all the way here to Palexpo. Sorry that we couldn't have this as the last time in the Palais because of the renovation works. But I hope I am sure that we will still have a very good meeting. I also imagine or assume that you have followed the discussion, or at least the statements so far, and you have followed my statement, so I won't repeat too much what I have already said, but I think it is important to flag that this forum is an institutional requirement. There is a General Assembly resolution that says that every 4 years UNHCR has to convene a Global Refugee Forum, and the 4 years are now, because the previous one was 4 years ago. Of course, it happens at a time of great turmoil, great humanitarian tragedies, and I use the word in plural because, of course, we are all tremendously anguished by the situation in Gaza and by the suffering of the people there. Like I said, but let me repeat it, I saw that some of you have quoted it, but certainly I mean it very strongly. We are echoing the repeated and insistent call of the Secretary General for a humanitarian ceasefire. I would add, followed hopefully by the resumption of meaningful peace discussions for finding a settlement to this one of the oldest conflicts in the world, current conflicts in the world. But at the moment, the great concern is the humanitarian situation. In a few moments, when we resume the meeting, my colleague Filippo Lazzarini, whom you know very well, will be addressing the forum through a special address that I have decided to insert because I thought it was very important. You know that UNRWA is the other UN refugee organization. So I think it's very important that they are here in the Global Refugee Forum, especially at a time of such suffering for Palestinian refugees. But it is not the only challenge that we face. My appeal to the forum has been not to forget other places. People in Darfur today suffer enormously. I was in Chad not so long ago. I met many of them crossing the border, having suffered violence, rape, mutilation, and other forms of abuse. And, all of this is happening in the indifference of the international community. Our humanitarian operations inside Sudan and in the countries neighboring Sudan, where 1.2 million Sudanese have taken refuge since last April, are 30% funded. And I think this is a symptom, if you wish, of the lack of interest of the international community. Even Ukraine, which of course continues to be a high-profile crisis, it seems that it is a little bit more hard than before to attract the attention of donors to help on the humanitarian side, which is still very much needed. The war is continuing, people are being bombed out of their houses, and there are many displaced, and it is winter. So this just a few notes, and I could mention to you so many other crises. Of course, we have been following very closely the works of COP28. I was myself in Dubai last week at the opening of COP28. The purpose of me being there is that we all know by now, I hope, that the climate emergency has one more effect among many others, which is to displace people. Sometimes they do it because there's natural disasters or rising sea levels, but many times it is because the climate emergency and conflict are very much interconnected, and then people flee both drought or floods, but also fighting. I've seen it myself with my eyes so many times in West Africa, for example, in the Horn of Africa, So it is important that humanitarian agencies are part of the discussion, that loss and damage funds include a component for immediate relief of affected communities when climate is the cause, and that everybody also works on adaptation and mitigation, also for people that are displaced, whose number we risk seeing increasing because of climate change. You will ask me what I think of the conclusions of COP. I am not an expert, so I will not give you a definitive answer, but of course you can well imagine that like the rest, like the Secretary General and the rest of the UN, we're asking for very robust action to how can I say, turn around the very dangerous trends on which the planet has embarked. On the forum itself, you know, the forum is built, is designed in a manner that somehow encourages all the participants to come together around what we call pledges. Now, you know, because you cover the UN, you know, many pledges are in many UN meetings. Here, what we mean by pledge is not necessarily money, although money is welcome. I told states money is always welcome because we're short of money. But it is also laws. It is also advocacy campaign. We already heard some very interesting pledges this morning in the opening session. And I hope that we can really count, and we know that we will count because we have been working on these pledges now with all the participants for many months. And we know that there will be some very interesting pledges. What, in my opinion, is the most interesting is when different actors come together around a pledge. We heard this morning the French leading a pledge on women refugees. We heard pledges on sports and refugees. So the good thing is when you have not one country or one company making a pledge, but several actors coming together and reinforcing each other. This is really the spirit of the forum. So please don't ask me the question because I will give you this answer. If you ask me, what you're expecting from the forum? I'm expecting a lot of these common pledges which reinforce each other. Because if a country, I always give this example, it's easy. If a country says, I have many refugees and I will allow the refugee children to go to school, to the national schools in my country, and another country or a financial institution or a private sector says, we will support education in your country, your system that is burdened by more refugees. This is an example of matching pledge. And we know that many pledges will be like this. So what we will do after, we will try to make sure, if a country wants to reinforce education systems, let those resources go to those countries that have good policies of inclusion of refugees. You see, this is really the foundation of the compact and of the Global Refugee Forum. So we have also been studying carefully the progress of the pledges made in 2019. I think they were 1,700 pledges, if I'm not mistaken, and many of them fulfilled, many of them have been realized, some are still in progress. I have to tell you, it's been very useful. You know, when we had the first forum, many countries made pledges. When I visit those countries, this is a talking point. I said, you made a pledge. Where, you know, have you implemented? Have you not implemented? So it helps us encourage states to do the things they have said they will do. So you understand also how the dynamics of this forum operate. We're happy we have registered, I think at the closing moment, 4,200 participants and 65 ministers, 165 governments. What I'm very proud of, 300 refugees. In the first refugee forum, we mobilized 70 refugees. Now we are at 300. It's not easy because, you know, it's complex to mobilize refugees, get them visas, permission to travel, structure them, support them. But I'm happy that we could do 4 times more the number. And many refugees are part of other delegations. They are with the states, for example, because they live in that country and they are part. This is all very interesting because, of course, refugees will now add their voice, their experience to the discussion, and this is very important. But then we have so many different actors here, not only states, not only financial institutions or UN, NGOs. We have sports organization, we have faith leaders, faith-based organization. Tomorrow there will be a moment of reflection led by faith leaders. We have academics. We have, and of course, big time, we have private sector and business. Last night we had a preliminary meeting with them, and I think it's well over 100 private sector organizations, companies, foundations, and so forth. They really have a very big role to play. In conclusion, is it all good? I think the forum is good. I think the world is not good, that's for sure. And we need to be very, very clear about that. That we see divisions, we see the institutions like the Security Council that are responsible for maintaining peace and security paralyzed constantly and unable to even agree on very basic resolutions, even in the humanitarian domain, which should be uncontroversial. And we see this fragmentation affecting every response: political, conflict resolution, climate responses, development, and so forth. So this is worrying, and this is why when people in the last few weeks told me, what is your main wish for the Global Refugee Forum, I always say, let it be at least this one, a moment of unity where we work together towards a cause. Thank you.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. So as you know, we have very many people who are listening to this press conference on the web, but you are the only one who can ask questions. And so I'll have the pleasure to start with Catherine Fiancon, France 24 French Channel.
Yes.
En français aussi,
En
Catherine,
français,
si tu veux.
je ne sais pas. What would you prefer? Maybe in English so everyone, it will be easier. There's no translation, huh?
There is no translation.
Okay, so English. Thank you for being with us here. And I'd like to ask you a question regarding UNRWA. We know that UNRWA is very dear to your heart. We, as you mentioned, Philippe Lazzarini is going to take the floor in a few minutes. I'd like to have your reaction to the decision of Switzerland. Thank you.
First of all, let me thank you for asking me a question about UNRWA because it is dear to my heart. I was for 9 years in UNRWA as the Deputy Commissioner General, and then in the same position as Philippe Lazzarini. I was perhaps, those were tough times, but not remotely as tough as it is now. They have lost, I don't know the exact count, he will tell you, he will say in the statement, but I think it's more than 130 people that have been killed. Yeah, because every day that head count unfortunately increases, and it is tragic. I don't think we have never seen in the UN such a loss of UN lives in such a short period of time because people have been killed. So I think it's something profoundly disturbing and tragic. And I cannot comment on the Swiss decision because I speak without full knowledge, but I do not think there is any decision yet. It is still being discussed. But I want to say, in response to your question, that I hope that Switzerland will continue to fund UNRWA, and not only Switzerland. I hope that every country will continue to fund UNRWA. You know, in my days, and I left UNRWA almost 10 years ago, it was very difficult to find the resources for UNRWA's work. And now I think it's 10 times more difficult. And many times in the last few years, the Commissioner General had to really send emergency messages to donors that if the money didn't come, they wouldn't be able to continue their work after 1 month or 2 months. I hope that everybody realizes now, unfortunately under tragic circumstances, how important UNRWA is. especially when an emergency like this. But not only an emergency, UNRWA provides education to 500,000 Palestinian children. UNRWA provides health services to millions of Palestinians. If UNRWA goes away and is not funded, the Palestinians that have already been so tragically penalized by history will be even more penalized. So a very strong and vibrant appeal through you, please, to donors to support UNRWA, not only for the emergency response, but going forward to support the agency that is so important for, I would say, not only the Palestinians, but the whole region.
Thank you very much. On the list I've got Nina Larsson, AFP.
Thank you for doing this. I wanted to ask you about the Rwanda deal in the UK. The Parliament yesterday agreed to let it go forward. I know that you've been very critical of that agreement. Britain, or the British government, is voicing criticism of UNHCR for criticizing that, saying that you yourself are sending vulnerable refugees to Rwanda through the program from Libya. So I was wondering if you could explain precisely your criticism and also your reaction to yesterday's decision, and if you're worried that this could impact perhaps British funding for UNHCR at a time when you are facing a funding crunch. Thank you.
So that's a lot of questions,
Sorry.
but I will simply say very quickly. One, we have not changed our position. And I don't, we saw a previous proposals of a certain arrangement, and we expressed our views, and our main view was that to transfer a state's responsibilities in terms of determining if a person is a refugee or not to another country, in another place, abdicating, renouncing that state's responsibility, is clearly against the 1951 Refugee Convention. And that opinion remains. Now, if there are different variations of this arrangement, we want to see them before we can comment them. But that, I think, is an important thing to say. There were also some concerns about the capacity of Rwanda, you recall, and the Supreme Court echoed this, to handle not so much refugees, because Rwanda has many refugees from Congo, from Burundi, but to handle this particular process of determination of refugee status, you need tools, infrastructure that a country like the UK has, but Rwanda doesn't have yet. So there are several elements of concern that are still there, and we are waiting to see how the situation evolves. We're not involved in this discussion, it's bilateral, and then we will always be ready to provide our opinion. And by the way, our support to the UK, because there are many things that we have suggested to the UK that they can do in terms of improving the system through which they adjudicate asylum. One of the big problems they have, and they're not the only country that has this problem, is a big backlog. But there are ways, through appropriate investments, that you can expedite the backlog. You can expedite, you don't need to have all these people accumulating without a decision if you do it properly. And actually, because now everything is sort of suspended in the UK, but a few months ago we had started working very well with the Home Office around these issues. On the parallel with Libya, I think this is completely misplaced. What we do in Libya is to evacuate very vulnerable cases of refugees, or people that we believe are in need of international protection, to a safer place where they can then be screened and sent to third countries. This is what this... So you cannot compare. And I hope, Libya is a country where much of this work cannot yet be done because of the fragility, because of conflict, because of violence. So that's why we cannot do it there. But it has nothing to do with the... It is profoundly different from what the United Kingdom discussed with Rwanda. So this is what I can say about this issue.
Laurent Sierro, ATS.
Yeah, thank you. Another question on Switzerland, as more broadly as a co-host, because there is not only that discussion at the Parliament. There was no federal councillor today because of the election of the whole government.
That's the only reason.
In Bern, yeah, but still. There is that discussion at the Parliament. There is another one in 1 week that might lead to the definitive cancellation of the resettlement program. So what's your comment on that sequence? What kind of image does that give as a co-host from the perspective of the other coast, where there has, you mentioned it, so much, there is so much at stake, and we are in a period of great turmoil?
I think the presence of the absence of the federal councillor really is due to the fact that today, we knew that. We couldn't change the date of the beginning of the forum, but the Swiss government told us very early on, this unfortunately happens on the very day of the election, or I don't know if we call it election, in the Federal Council. And actually, this is also the week when they discuss, if I understand correctly, the repartition of portfolios. So it's an important week for the Swiss government, and we respect that. The State Secretary was here and represented, I think, in a very appropriate manner, the co-host, the Swiss Confederation. On the rest, I would say that some of the things you're talking about are decisions to be made. I know that because also of the nature of the Swiss government, that is in which all parties are represented, there are discussions around these issues. And I know that there are some that are in favor of continuing resettlement. I have certainly made that pitch myself, saying that it is important that the refugee resettlement program of Switzerland continues, and that contributions to humanitarian organizations, including UNRWA, but including UNHCR, by the way, continue as well. So let's see what happens. I think it will depend also on these discussions, and let's hope it can continue, because I think that actually some of the things that Switzerland has tried to do, or some in the government have tried to do in the last few years, are very positive and very advanced. So let's hope that these advances can be maintained.
Jérémy Lange, Roi de France International.
Bonjour monsieur. Bonjour monsieur le commissaire.
Vous voulez en français?
En français, vous me devancez. Vous avez dit, ne me demandez pas ce que j'attends du forum.
En anglais.
Déjà dit. Alors, je vais essayer quand même de détourner la question. Je vais vous demander ce à quoi vous ne vous attendez pas. J'imagine que vous ne vous attendez pas, par exemple, à une hausse des contributions. On l'a vu, les affaires humanitaires ont lancé un appel pour l'année prochaine qui était en deçà de ce qu'ils avaient demandé auparavant, pas parce que les besoins étaient moins importants, mais parce qu'ils doutaient obtenir tout l'argent nécessaire. Ce matin, le roi de Jordanie a affirmé qu'il avait reçu le moins d'argent depuis le début, enfin voilà, une année où il avait reçu extrêmement peu d'argent pour aider à régler la crise des réfugiés. Est-ce que concrètement vous attendez à une baisse des contributions?
Vous touchez un point extrêmement important, je vous remercie de la question. Je suis très inquiet par la question des contributions, et ça ne concerne que le HCR. Vous savez, je pense que le roi ce matin en a parlé, et d'autres aussi, le PAM par exemple, le Programme alimentaire mondial, la plus grande agence humanitaire, le Comité international de la Croix-Rouge, nos voisins et partenaires ici à Genève. On est tous dans une situation difficile. Le HCR cette année, je ne dis pas pour remplir son budget, parce qu'on n'y arrive jamais à remplir le budget. On arrive à 50-60% chaque année. Mais avec 50 ou 60% des financements, on fait des priorités, on se focalise et on arrive à avancer. Là, pour arriver au minimum des choses qu'on doit faire, on a estimé qu'on a besoin encore, et je parle de 2023, de 400 millions de dollars. Je ne pense pas qu'on les aura d'ici le 31 décembre, qui est notre année fiscale, si vous voulez. Donc, je suis très inquiet parce que qu'est-ce qu'on a fait? On a dû déjà reporter certaines activités, en réduire des autres, faire des coupures de personnel. Enfin, comme tout le monde, on a dû faire un travail d'austérité budgétaire qui est profondément contradictoire dans une situation où nous avons une nouvelle énorme urgence chaque 6-8 mois. N'est-ce pas? Nous avons eu, la liste est longue, l'Éthiopie, l'Afghanistan, l'Ukraine, le Covid. Et maintenant, bon, le HCR n'est pas impliqué directement, bah, beaucoup d'autres agences sont impliquées au Moyen-Orient, à Gaza. Donc, malgré toutes ces urgences, le HCR a déclaré plus de 40 fois une situation d'urgence dans la dernière année et nous avons moins d'argent que l'année passée. Est-ce que les perspectives sont bonnes pour 2024? Je ne sais pas. Je suis inquiet. Le débat budgétaire est difficile, mis à part l'humanitaire. Il est difficile à Washington, vous le suivez certainement. Il est difficile à Berlin. Vous avez vu toute la discussion sur les 60 milliards de la transition énergétique. Donc, c'est compliqué pour tout. Pas nécessairement pour des raisons liées à l'humanitaire, mais c'est l'humanitaire qui souvent paye le manque d'argent. L'humanitaire n'a pas de voix dans les élections. Et donc, l'humanitaire est souvent coupé au moment où on en a plus besoin. Donc, si je peux vous demander à vous tous de transmettre cette inquiétude comme un des messages qui viennent de ce forum, parce que on va avoir beaucoup d'idées, beaucoup d'initiatives, beaucoup de nouveaux projets, mais si on n'a pas les ressources, c'est difficile de le faire. J'ai encore 5 minutes.
Okay.
I still have 5 more minutes.
I'll go with the list that people have seen. It was really not a choice, but I'll go to the lady here. Can you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Lama Shahadi from the National. I wondered if you could comment on the Prime Minister of Lebanon's speech regarding the return of Syrians to Syria, and what conversations are you having with the government about this?
We have constant conversation with the government of Lebanon. And, I share very much the Prime Minister's deep concern that he expressed this morning in his statement, which you have certainly followed, about the situation of Lebanon. 1 in 4, 1 in 5, depending on how you count, people in Lebanon is a refugee. The burden is enormous on a country that has a lot of other challenges, political challenges, financial challenges, social and economic challenges, and it's a little bit like the RFE question. At the same time, even those of us who try to help by supporting the Lebanese government get less funding than last year. I have to say, we've campaigned very hard for more funding for Lebanon, for Jordan in particular. We have got some extra funding. The United States, for example, just a few days ago allocated more than $30 million extra for UNHCR in this country. So I think people understand, countries understand, but when the money is short, unfortunately, it's situations like that suffer. Of course, the question of return of Syrian refugees to Syria depends on many factors. Certainly depends on more humanitarian assistance inside Syria, but it also depends on security, or on people feeling safe and confident that they go back. We cannot endorse any forced return, you understand that. But if people go back voluntarily, we advocate for more support to be given to them.
I'll try to be quick. Stéphane Boussard, and then I have Moussa John, the gentleman in black. I don't know if we'll manage to make everybody, but
I'll try to be telegraphic, and we'll keep the delegates waiting for 5 minutes.
Thank you, High Commissioner. Since you were talking about the funding of UNHCR and the financial crunch, you talked about staff cuts. Could you elaborate a little bit on the extent of the staff cuts here in Geneva, but also maybe worldwide? Thank you.
It is worldwide. We have had to cut about 900 positions. Remember, this is we are 20,000 staff, I think, altogether. So it's big. It's almost 5%. So that was short.
That was perfect. Moussa Assi El Mahedine. Juste là derrière, messieurs. Ah, voilà.
Merci beaucoup. Une question sur Gaza. On entend depuis 2 semaines, ou bien plus même, des déclarations de la part d'Israël ou de certains dirigeants israéliens pour évacuer une partie de Gaza et refouler les gens vers l'Égypte ou ailleurs. Est-ce que cela vous inquiète? Quel est votre point de vue? Est-ce qu'on est devant un danger de nouveau, une crise de réfugiés, une nouvelle crise de réfugiés pour vous? Merci.
Ça m'inquiète beaucoup et merci de cette question. Elle est importante. Ce matin, j'y ai fait allusion dans ma déclaration. Je ne pouvais pas entrer dans tous les détails quand j'ai dit que le déplacement en cours, parce qu'il y a un déplacement massif en cours à l'intérieur de la bande de Gaza, des gens qui sont progressivement poussés vers le sud, on le sait. Et ces déclarations nous inquiètent, bien qu'elles ne soient pas des déclarations officielles, mais bien sûr, elles nous inquiètent parce que on le sait tous, on connaît tous les tenants et les aboutissants de la question. Premièrement, 2/3 de la population de Gaza, il ne faut pas oublier, sont déjà des réfugiés qui ont déjà souffert, eux ou leurs familles, le traumatisme de l'exil en 1949, certains en 1967. En plus, il nous paraît très difficile que s'il y avait un mouvement de population à l'extérieur de Gaza, je pense que ça ne peut que vouloir dire l'Égypte, ça serait extrêmement déstabilisant pour l'Égypte, pour la région du Sinaï, et ça rendrait une solution à la problématique palestinienne encore plus difficile, parce que vous connaissez mieux que moi la question très débattue et très complexe du retour des réfugiés palestiniens. Ici, nous aurions un élément de plus de retour à faire qui serait pratiquement impossible. Donc, je pense que c'est très important d'insister que cette évacuation de personnes au-delà ne doit pas être promue, ne doit pas être poussée, forcée. Mais évidemment, puisque les gens sont sous les bombes et sont dans une situation très difficile, il faut dire que le cessez-le-feu est la seule voie de sortie de cette impasse pour qu'on puisse tout d'abord acheminer l'aide humanitaire. Je ne veux pas parler pour M. Lazzarini qui va le faire dans quelques minutes. Et puis, on l'espère, œuvrer vers des solutions, y compris la reconstruction de la ville, etc. Donc, franchement, je pense qu'il faut être inquiet, il faut rejeter ce narratif de mouvement ultérieur de population et continuer à insister pour que le cessez-le-feu soit rétabli dans les délais les plus rapides possibles. Et il faut que j'arrive.
I'm sorry, but the High Commissioner has to go and chair the next session with Mr. Lazzarini.
Thank
So thank you very
colleagues.
much.
Much appreciated all this interest. Thank you.
Thank
Please
you, and sorry for those who
cover
couldn't
well
take.
this.
Bye. C'erano ancora 3. At the end of the so we will have another chance to get to hear.